Okay, so how did you meet Grandpa?
Oh, that's a good story. You've probably heard it before. But, you know, my girlfriend and I went to Milwaukee. That was, we took a weekend to go down and do shopping and take in a show and what have you after. It was a holiday weekend, so we had an extra day there, and we decided to go down to Milwaukee. And I didn't have any lunch because I had to get on the train. We took the train, so I worked in the morning, and then we just went right from my work. I was working in the bank at that time, and so I skipped my lunch hour and so that I could finish up my work in the morning. Then we went and got the train, and I didn't have any lunch, and I got hungry, and I got a terrible headache.
No.
And by the time we got down there, and I just wasn't feeling that great, so we thought we'd go to a movie, but then I said I just didn't care to go because I wasn't. So there was a place called right downtown. It's called the Plankinton Arcade, and that was well, like our malls that we have nowadays. And there was a fountain there that had a seat around the edge of it, and so we were just sitting there, and there was a little penny arcade. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's where they have a lot of machines where you put money in, and they have all kinds of, kind of an amusement place.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were just sitting there, and these two young men came along, and they were watching something on the screen that was going on, and they were kind of standing in front of us there to see that. And then all of a sudden this fellow turned around and he said, "Oh, excuse me." And he thought that he was blocking our way, our view. So those were the first words Dad ever said to me was, "Excuse me." And so then after they got through looking at it, they turned around, they started talking to us and finding out who we were, you know, what we were doing. And so we told them that we were there in the city to just try kind of a little vacation. And we were going to go shopping and see a show. And he said, "Well, you're not doing it sitting here." He said, "How would you like?" He said, "Do you care to dance?" And we both, you know, like dancing. And they had what they called dance halls in those days, where they just had brought in big name bands, and you could go and dance all evening.
Oh.
Well, they had this. So he said, "Well, would you like to go dancing? We could go over to the dancing place." And so we said, "Sure." So we picked. It was a pickup, really, is what it was. So then we went and spent the evening dancing and getting acquainted, and then he asked if he could see me the next day. In the meantime, he was saying something about giving me a full rush job, I would say, telling me how wonderful I was. And he said, you're just the girl the girl that I would like to marry." And that kind of took me off my. He said, "Well, you've known me now," he said, "for how many hours it was, I don't know." He said, "How would you like to make it, say it was 4 hours, how would you like to know me for 4 months? And, well, how would you like to know me for 4 years? And he was saying, how would you like to marry me?"
So
it was that quick, and it just took me off my guard, you know, and I said, "Well, we'll have to learn a little bit more about each other." And he said, "Well, I'd like to see you tomorrow if you can." So then he made a date with me, and I met him at a park that was near his home there, and he lived in Whitefish Bay, which is a suburb of Milwaukee. So we spent the afternoon together at the park there, and just talking and chatting and taking a walk, and so then he said, "Well," he said, "I may just come up and see you," he said, "next weekend if I can," because you know we had that distance between us. And so I said, "Well, that would be fine. I would check with my parents, you know." And in the meantime, he was writing me every day. And so then he came up, and on the following Saturday, and he checked in at we had a YMCA there, so he checked in, and that's where he was going to stay.
Uh-huh.
And so then we spent the weekend together at my folks' house, and my parents really liked him. And so then he said, well, he said he'd like to have me come down and meet his folks the following week. So then I went back, and that was our commute. That's the way we got to know each other, just by going back and forth each weekend. And so then he did ask me to marry him, and I said, well, we would wait till after the war, because the war was going on, and he was in service. Although he wasn't in uniform. He was going to, they were putting him through Signal Corps school. He was going to become a radar specialist. And so, until he, so that was our courtship back and forth on the train. And each weekend. And
how old were you back then?
I was 19. And so then we finally got engaged. He gave me a ring, and we were going to wait till after the war to get married. Because we didn't know what what the Army was going to do with him or where he was going to be. So then he was sent to Chicago, and so then of course the commute was a little bit further.
Yeah.
And so we got together, and we thought. He said. And so he said, I just don't know what, he said, we can't go back and forth anymore each weekend. So he said, why don't we get married? So that's when we decided we'd get married. And so we were married in February. I met him in October, and we were married in February.
Okay. Tell me about when you were married.
The what?
Tell me about when you were married.
Oh, when we got married, well, it was during the war, and it was the middle of the winter, and we didn't plan a big wedding because we weren't sure even if people could even get there, because the snow in Wisconsin is pretty bad in the winter. So we just had a small church wedding, and then his best man, the man he was asked to be his best man, the week before we were married, he was called into the service.
Oh.
And so his brother had to come and stand in for him. So that's how uncertain things were in those days. And so then we got married, and then he was still in Chicago, stationed in Chicago. So that's where we spent our honeymoon, was in Chicago. And then we lived there until from February until July. Not July, and then he was put into the Army, regular Army, he was actually in the Signal Corps, attached to the Air Force, and they sent him to Miami, Florida, for his basic training. So then in August I went down to Florida, and I stayed with another serviceman's wife. We had an apartment there, and then we got. I went to work there. I worked in a women's apparel shop there, and we got to go out to the camp every, I don't know how, I think on weekends, Sundays maybe, or something like that. They let the wives come out and visit. And then he'd get leave every once in a while to come into town, and then we would get together. And so that's the first part of our married life.